This story doesn't begin with a bang. It begins with a silence. The silence in a cold flat in Bolton belonging to a man named Arthur Jenkins. He served his country for 40 years. He paid his taxes. He played by the rules. And last week, his pension was cut. The letter he received was brief. Budgetary adjustments. It said national circumstances. His flat was cold. But the answer he got from his government was colder. Miles away in Westminster, another decision was being made, not in silence, but in a closed door or office. Keir Starmer, pen in hand, signed a transfer order. There was no debate. There was no vote, just a stroke of a pen. 5 minutes later, an email was leaked from the Treasury. An email you were never supposed to see. It appeared on a secure server in Berlin, just long enough to be copied before it was wiped. But it was too late. The number was out. £9.44 billion. Not for the crumbling hospitals, not for the pothole-filled roads, not for Arthur Jenkins' pension. That money was diverted. A single word was stamped next to the enormous figure. Emergency. An emergency for what? The next line answered the question. New accommodation supports operation. At the same time, in Dover, the boats continue to arrive. Hundreds, then thousands, stepping onto English shores. But this time, they weren't taken to temporary processing centres. They were bussed directly to hotels, not rundown host. 4-star country hotels, clean sheets, hot meals, and the heating turned all the way up. It was for Arthur. It was an adjustment. For them, it was a welcome. A journalist from a small Manchester outlet called the Minister's Office. He asked about the 9.44 billion. He asked why pensions were being frozen while new hotels were being funded. The answer he received was standard. The situation is under control. And then the line went dead, but something had broken. This was no longer about politics. This was no longer about economics. This was about betrayal. A betrayal signed in ink and paid for by the cold in the flat of a man who gave his entire life to this country. That night, London made its decision, and people like Arthur, the people who built this nation, were left behind. By the next morning, the silence from the press was absolute. The 9.4 billion figure was not just ignored, it was erased. The Manchester journalist who made the call, his website was suddenly inexplicably down for technical maintenance. The digital Iron Curtain had fallen. By noon, the chamber at Westminster was full, not for an emergency debate on the pension crisis, not to demand answers for Arthur Jenkins. They were gathered to discuss offshore wind farm subsidies. An independent member of parliament from a small northern town, a man who still lived in the constituency he served, rose from the back benches. He held a printed copy of the leaked Treasury email, the 9.4 billion order. A point of order, he shouted, his voice raw. This is a matter of national theft. £9.4 billion diverted from our pensioners to fund. The speaker cut his microphone. The right honourable gentleman is out of order. That is not the matter on the paper. Keir Starmer didn't flinch. He didn't look up. He simply took a sip of water and turned the page of his prepared speech. No apology, no investigation, no plan. The live parliamentary feed broadcast on the BC quickly cut to an external shot of the building. The message was clear. The leak was contained. The betrayal was now official policy. South of London, a convoy of new unmarked buses rolled past towns where local GPS were no longer taking new patients. They turned into the private gated entrance of a country hotel. The no vacancies sign had been permanently lit for a week. Locals watching from their cars began to film. They filmed the buses. They filmed the security guards who stepped out wearing earpieces, checking a list. They filmed the men, young and undocumented, being led into the warm lobby. Within an hour, those videos began to appear on social media, and within minutes, they began to disappear. This content violates community standards, the message read. Whose standards? Not the standards of Arthur Jenkins, still in his cold flat. Not the standards of the people watching their country being sold hotel by hotel, billion by billion. The government called it procedure. The people were beginning to call it what it was, an occupation. But you cannot delete the truth. You can only delay it. For every video removed for violating community standards, 10 more were uploaded from new accounts. The clips were downloaded, saved, shared via encrypted messages. The digital dam was breaking. The truth found its way to a small town in Kent, a town that had just seen its local library closed due to council budget cuts. The town was home to the Oakwood Manor Hotel, a 4-star Georgian building that was now, according to the leaked logs, Accommodation Hub 7. By 3 p.m, the private road leading to the hotel was blocked. Not by organised activists, not by politicians. It was blocked by farmers on their tractors. It was blocked by shopkeepers who had closed early. It was blocked by mothers pushing empty pram. One woman, Sarah, a local school nurse whose paediatric department had just lost its funding, stood at the front. She wasn't shouting. She held a small handwritten sign. It didn't say anything violent. It just asked a question. Arthur Jenkins is cold. Why? She just wanted an answer. The government's answer arrived at 4:17 p.m. It did not come in a letter. It arrived in 3 large white police vans. Officers filed out, not community police, but tactical aid units, helmets on, batters drawn. They formed a line shoulder to shoulder, protecting the hotel's entrance from the school nurse and the farmers. A local reporter, the last one left in the area, tried to film. An officer stepped directly in front of his camera. "You need to move along, sir. This is a private matter. It's a £9.4 billion public matter," the reporter said. The officer's gloved hand covered the lens. By 6 p.m, the BBC finally ran the story. A 15-second segment buried between a weather report and a story about a celebrity. The anchor reading from the prompter called it a small gathering of far-right extremists causing public disruption. Extremists. That's what they called Sarah. That's what they called the farmers. From his coal flat in Bolton, Arthur Jenkins watched the evening news. He saw the police line. He saw the word extremist flash across the screen. And in that moment, he understood this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an oversight. This was a choice. The government wasn't just ignoring him. It was now actively at war with him. The word extremist was meant to be a political kill shot. It was designed to isolate Sarah the nurse, to paint the farmers as a violent fringe, and to frighten everyone else back into silence. But London, in its insulated bubble of power, had profoundly miscalculated. They weren't fighting a fringe. They were fighting a nation that was cold, broke, and watching. By 8 p.m, the word extremist was the number one trend on social media, but it was being used as a badge of honour. A plumber from Birmingham posted a photo of his gas bill. "My bill is up 300%. I can't heat my own home. I guess that makes me an extremist." A mother from Leeds posted a photo of her child's overcrowded classroom. "No funding for our schools, but £9.4 billion for new hotels. I am an extremist." The clip of the officer covering the camera lens had 10 million views before the Home Office censors could find and delete it. Sarah's sign, "Arthur Jenkins is cold." Why was everywhere? It was no longer a question. It was an accusation. In Manchester, just miles from Arthur's flat, a group of men gathered in a local Royal British Legion. Old men, men with quiet voices and medals hanging in glass cases on the wall. They watched the 10 o'clock news. They saw the police line. They heard the anchor repeat the government line about extremists in Kent. One of them, a man who had served in 2 tours, stood up. He pointed at the screen. "They're guarding a hotel," he said, his voice gravel. "While a man who served his country freezes, that is not the nation I fought for." By 9 a.m. the next morning, they were there, not in Kent, in Bolton. 10 veterans, medals pinned to their old coats, standing in silent, perfect formation outside Arthur Jenkins' apartment building. They weren't shouting. They weren't blocking anything. They were just there. A single new sign was placed at their feet. It read, "We are guarding a real Britain. We are extremists." This the government could not handle. This was not in their playbook. You cannot use riot shields against old men with medals. You cannot censor silent dignity. London began to panic. A new frantic memo was sent from Starmer's office. This one leaked too. The extremist narrative is failing. Public anger is shifting from the accommodation centres to the 9.4 billion fund. We must refocus, emphasise legality, emphasise humanitarian obligation. But it was too late. The people weren't debating humanitarian obligation. They were looking at their empty bank accounts. They were looking at their cold radiators. And they were looking at the £9.4 billion they would never see. The betrayal was complete. The word extremist was meant to be a political kill shot. It was designed to isolate Sarah the nurse, to paint the farmers as a violent fringe, and to frighten everyone else back into silence. But London, in its insulated bubble of power, had profoundly miscalculated. They weren't fighting a fringe. They were fighting a nation that was cold, broke and watching. By 8 p.m, the word extremist was the number one trend on social media, but it was being used as a badge of honour. A plumber from Birmingham posted a photo of his gas bill. My bill is up 300%. I can't heat my own home. I guess that makes me an extremist. A mother from Leeds posted a photo of her child's overcrowded classroom. No funding for our schools, but 9.4 billion for new hotels. I'm an extremist. The clip of the officer covering the camera lens had 10 million views before the Home Office censors could find and delete it. Sarah St. Arthur Jenkins is cold. Why was everywhere? It was no longer a question. It was an accusation. In Manchester, just miles from Arthur's flat, a group of men gathered in a local Royal British Legion. Old men, men with quiet voices and medals hanging in glass cases on the wall. They watched the 10 o'clock news. They saw the police line. They've deployed. The realisation settled over them like a shroud. This was no longer a protest. This was an occupation. And the government had just used the British Army to make it clear who the enemy was. It was them. At 11 a.m, a local police inspector arrived. He was a man they recognised. He looked exhausted. He was carrying a new order, one that hadn't come from local command but was faxed directly from the Home Office in London. Gentlemen, the inspector started, his voice heavy. This gathering it's now designated an illegal assembly. You are being charged with inciting sedition. Sedition, the old veteran replied, stepping forward. We are guarding a British pensioner whose money you gave away. The sedition is in Westminster, Inspector. The sedition is at Clyde Port, where our army is arresting our workers. The inspector looked at the medals on the old man's chest. He looked at the facts in his hand. He had 24 officers behind him, their faces unreadable. They had been ordered to clear the area using all necessary force. He stood there, the 10 feet of pavement between the police and the veterans, feeling like a canyon. Then he made his choice. He slowly unclipped the radio from his shoulder. He turned to his own officers. Stand down, he commanded. Then he turned back to the veteran. He removed his police cap, holding it in his hands. The army's at the dock, sir. Those aren't my orders. We've just been told to contain the fallout. We're not police anymore. We're just crowd control for thieves. He took one step forward. No longer an inspector, just a man. We will not be moving you today. We serve the people, not the protocol. The clip filmed from a window above was the one clip the censors couldn't catch. It bypassed the throttled internet, spreading phone to phone, device to device. It was the moment the state's authority died. The video of the Bolton inspector standing down was the spark that lit the dry tinder. It didn't just go viral, it was a declaration of independence from Westminster's protocol. Within an hour, similar reports trickled in. A police unit in Perth, ordered to secure a new hotel, remained in their canteen. A traffic division in Leeds, tasked with setting up highway checkpoints, reported critical fleet maintenance issues. The government's chain of command from London to the streets was broken. When the financial markets opened in London, it wasn't a crash, it was an evaporation. The £9.44 billion. Once an investment was now the price tag of a failed state. International investors didn't just see a port strike, they saw an army deployed against its own citizens and a police force in open passive rebellion. The pound didn't just fall, it plummeted. European investors, then Asian, then American, began a mass sell-off of UK government bonds. The cost of borrowing, the lifeblood of the nation, skyrocketed. The 94 billion diversion was now costing the country 100 billion an hour. Inside Parliament, Keir Starmer called an emergency Cobra session. He walked into the chamber to address the nation. Half the seats were empty. Dozens of his own party members had not just resigned. They had simply vanished. Their phones switched off, their offices locked. He stood at the dispatch box, the autoprompter glowing with a pre-written speech about stability and rogue elements. But the words were meaningless. The cameras were rolling, but nobody was listening. At 2 p.m, an advisor, pale and shaking, leaned in close to the Prime Minister. He didn't whisper, "Scotland is gone." He whispered the eulogy for the entire United Kingdom. "Prime Minister!" The advisor's voice was a dead monotone. "The Bank of England just failed to sell its bonds. The markets are gone. The police in Bolton are still with the veterans. Glasgow is held by an army that is now refusing to arrest dock workers. Sir, the 9.4 billion, it wasn't a diversion. It was a suicide note." Starmer stared blankly. He meant politically. It sounded final. Outside in Bolton, the rain had stopped. The veterans were still there, standing with the police inspector. Someone had brought them all hot tea. White cloth symbols of peace and refusal hung from Arthur Jenkins' window and his neighbours. London could not censor this. It could not arrest this. It had no one left to send. What began with a cold flat and a secret ledger had ended in the soft daylight. The government had not been defeated by a riot. It had been abandoned by the truth. And for the first time in generations, the people didn't need to shout to be heard. They just needed to stand together and watch the hollow men in their distant capital finally, irrevocably,